We've already estimated the value of the Spirit of the Azure Spring formula. As long as the price doesn't exceed our range, we can agree to it. William White nodded, a trace of hesitation flashing in his eyes, as he turned to look toward the wine storage. What's wrong, Mr. William? Is there something you're not telling me? The woman stared at William White, dissatisfied. It's not that. It's just that I didn't develop the formula. One of my staff members did. Whether or not he's willing to sell it, I can't say. How about I call him out so you can discuss it with him? Would that work for you? William White quickly waved his hand, afraid the woman might leave, and spoke hurriedly. The woman nodded and said, I'm only interested in the formula. It doesn't matter who I talk to. Call him out. Just a moment. William White quickly responded, turning around and heading toward the wine storage. Kyle Lincoln, are you awake? William White knocked loudly on the wine storage door, calling out. Kyle Lincoln had already heard the noise outside but assumed it was just customers dining and didn't pay much attention. He turned over to continue sleeping. Unexpectedly, just as Kyle Lincoln was about to fall asleep, he heard knocking on the door. He quickly responded, got up, and dressed before heading out. Uncle William? It's so late. What's going on? Kyle Lincoln asked, puzzled, as he looked at William White. Kyle Lincoln, we have a guest at the restaurant who wants to buy the Spirit of the Azure Spring formula. Since you're the one who developed it, I can't make the decision on my own, so I came to ask you, William White said, feeling a bit awkward and conflicted. What? Someone wants to buy that useless thing? Who would be crazy enough to do that? Kyle Lincoln instinctively responded. Trash? This is supposed to be trash. William White exclaimed in surprise, looking at Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln's gaze froze for a moment, and he suddenly snapped out of his daze. Waving his hand hurriedly, he said, No, I misspoke. Where is this person? Let me take a look. Who has such sharp eyes? William White quickly pulled Kyle Lincoln into the main hall, pointing at the woman sitting in front. It's this young lady right here. Kyle Lincoln followed William White's gesture and saw a woman sitting in the center of the hall, wearing a sleek blue dress. Her exquisite, flawless face exuded arrogance and disdain. With her arms crossed over her chest, her posture further accentuated her ample, high bosom. The deep cleavage visible through her V neckline, combined with her porcelain white skin, was enough to make anyone tempted to take a bite. The moment Kyle Lincoln laid eyes on the woman, a chilling sensation surged through him. His gaze locked onto her, unwavering. What's going on? Kyle Lincoln was startled, quickly suppressing his emotions and instinctively stepping back. Oh? So it's you. I was wondering who it could be. Why aren't you dead yet? You're so stubbornly clinging to life, but I don't think you'll last much longer. Useless trash. The woman stood up as soon as she saw Kyle Lincoln, her face full of contempt as she mocked him. Kyle Lincoln stared at the woman before him, and a flood of memories began to surface in his mind. Her identity gradually became clear. Megan Lee? My ex-wife, right? Kyle Lincoln sneered, looking at the woman in front of him. Oh? What's this? Have you forgotten me already, you impotent man? Megan Lee shot Kyle Lincoln a disdainful look, her expression full of scorn. Kyle Lincoln's face immediately darkened, and his fists clenched tightly. Chapter 32, The Image of Green's boss. William White glanced at Kyle Lincoln with a peculiar expression. His gaze then shifted downward, and though he wanted to laugh, he feared angering Kyle Lincoln. Covering his mouth, he tried his best to stifle his laughter. 3 seconds and done, and now you've taken up brewing alcohol? Is your spirit of the azure spring some sort of compensation for your inner insecurities? A man who can't even manage that, what else can you do? Brewing alcohol? How ridiculous! Megan Lee ignored Kyle Lincoln and continued her verbal assault. Kyle Lincoln stared at Megan Lee, his face emotionless, as though none of her words were directed at him. He stood still, expressionless, watching her. Kyle Lincoln, they say great misfortune leads to great fortune. I used to believe that saying, but looking at you now, haha, what a joke. Impotent as ever, you're still the same as before, no change at all. Megan Lee said loudly, her disdainful eyes fixed on Kyle Lincoln. Impotent? Who are you calling impotent? Suddenly, a dissatisfied voice came from upstairs, and a figure quickly descended the staircase. Both Kyle Lincoln and William White turned to look. A stunning figure in an extremely provocative nightgown was descending rapidly. Who else could it be but Bianca White? Bianca White had just come downstairs when she grabbed Kyle Lincoln's arm, looking at him affectionately. Husband, I'm so sorry for making you feel wronged. It's just that you're too intense, over an hour and still not done. If this keeps up, I'll be exhausted. You little brat, who do you think you are? What gives you the right to interfere? Megan Lee's expression immediately changed, glaring at Bianca White with dissatisfaction. Why can't I interfere? He's my boyfriend. You insulted my boyfriend, saying he's impotent or something. My husband is very strong. If there's any truth to your words, it's only because my husband doesn't care about you at all and just wants to get it over with. Bianca White looked at Megan Lee with disdain, not showing her any respect. Bianca, don't tell the truth, it hurts people too much. Kyle Lincoln said calmly, gently patting Bianca White's soft little hand while smiling at Megan Lee. You, say that again. Megan Lee was so enraged she almost spat blood. With her charming figure and the scent of expensive perfume, countless men wanted to sleep with her. Yet, now she was being dismissed as unworthy by someone she considered impotent. For someone as confident in her physical allure as Megan Lee, this was unbearable. I don't repeat myself, especially when it's the truth. Miss Lee, you should leave. You're not welcome here. We're done. Stop begging me. I really won't go back to you. Honestly, you no longer interest me. Kyle Lincoln said with a faint smile, shrugging innocently. Megan Lee was so furious her breathing became irregular. Her hands trembled as she clutched her handbag, glaring daggers at Kyle Lincoln. Her heavily made-up face alternated between pale and green with anger. Fine, Kyle Lincoln, you're really bold now. You even dare to talk to me like this and bring some little girl here to provoke me. Today, I'll show you that I'm not someone you can mess with. Megan Lee pointed at Kyle Lincoln, gritting her teeth as she took out her phone to make a call. Kyle Lincoln didn't even glance at Megan Lee, continuing to share sweet moments with Bianca White, which only made Megan Lee angrier. Her chest heaved violently, and she nearly fainted from rage. William White, who was watching from the side, was also gritting his teeth. If it weren't for his understanding of the situation, he would have already stepped in to drag this arrogant boy away from taking advantage of his daughter. Bang! Suddenly, there was a loud noise from outside. Moments later, several figures quickly entered White's wandering kitchen. The last person to enter even turned to close the door behind them. William White and Bianca White's faces immediately changed. Bianca White instinctively clung to Kyle Lincoln's waist. Kyle Lincoln patted Bianca White's small hand, signaling her not to worry. He placed Bianca next to William White and said, "William White, both of you go hide in the back for now. Leave this to me. Be careful, Kyle," Bianca White said with a worried expression. "Still have time for sweet talk, huh? You little *tch, if I don't tear your mouth apart today, I won't bear the Lee name anymore." Megan Lee, who had always been pampered, couldn't stand seeing someone treat her ex-husband so tenderly. Her nose almost twisted with anger as she pointed at Bianca White and yelled, "Megan Lee, if you weren't a woman, I wouldn't let you leave here standing today. I'm giving you one last chance, take your people and leave now, and I won't make things difficult for you. If not, don't blame me for being merciless." Kyle Lincoln turned to look at Megan Lee, his voice unwavering. "Wow, does White's Wandering Kitchen really have someone this bold? I used to think young Master Arthur Gold was exaggerating when he mentioned it, but it seems to be true. Hey, kid, come here and introduce yourself. Where are you from? How dare you act so recklessly on Boss Green's turf?" A furious voice suddenly rang out from behind Megan Lee. A burly man, nearly 2 meters tall and weighing over 100 kilos, appeared behind her, pointing at Kyle Lincoln as he shouted. Kyle Lincoln's previously calm expression shifted into a slight smirk. "I was just wondering who I could vent my frustration on. You've come at the perfect time. Tell me, who the hell are you to be barking here?" Kyle Lincoln showed no fear as he pulled a chair over and casually sat down. "You don't even know our Boss Green? Are you blind?" The thug behind him pointed at Kyle Lincoln and yelled. The burly man, with a smug expression, strode forward and grabbed a chair, sitting directly across from Kyle Lincoln. "Kid, don't say I didn't warn you. Megan Lee is my wife. If you dare to talk about her, you're talking about me. I'm Edward Green, and if there's one thing I know, it's killing and arson. I'll give you one last chance, hand over the recipe for Spirit of the Azure Spring, or I'll burn this White's Wandering Kitchen to the ground today." Bang! Before Edward Green could finish his sentence, Kyle Lincoln abruptly stood up and delivered a powerful kick straight to Edward Green's chest. The force sent the massive man flying backward, slamming hard against the wall behind him. "Burn my place down? You're really pushing your luck, acting all high and mighty here." Kyle Lincoln sneered as he looked at Edward Green, who was groaning on the ground. Grabbing the chopstick holder from the table, he strode toward him. The gang of thugs behind Edward Green was completely stunned. Kyle Lincoln wasn't playing by the usual rules. Just moments ago, they were negotiating, and now he'd suddenly attacked. Before they could react, Kyle Lincoln wasted no time. He approached Edward Green, pulled a chopstick from the holder, and stabbed it forcefully into Edward's wrist. Thunk! A sickening sound of flesh being pierced echoed clearly. The chopstick drove through Edward Green's wrist, protruding from the back of his hand. Blood gushed from the wound, dripping down his arm. "Ah! Ah!" Edward Green screamed in agony, staring at his injured wrist. Writhing on the ground, clutching his hand, he no longer resembled the fearsome Boss Green. Kyle Lincoln let out a cold snort, stood up, and looked over at Megan Lee. Megan Lee's face had turned deathly pale, devoid of any color. Seeing Kyle Lincoln's gaze, she collapsed to her knees in terror, her body trembling uncontrollably. The thugs behind only reacted at this moment, hastily pulling out steel pipes and daggers from their sides, shouting at Kyle Lincoln, but none dared to truly step forward. Kyle Lincoln looked at Megan Lee with contempt and said, "Megan Lee, do you really think finding some so-called big boss can actually protect you? Look at his bulky figure, he's nothing but a premature ejaculator." "He's not a premature ejaculator," Megan Lee instinctively retorted, but immediately clammed up in fear upon seeing Kyle Lincoln, not daring to move. "Not?" Kyle Lincoln sneered coldly, glancing at Edward Green, who was writhing on the ground, and reached into his pocket to pull out a wrapped bundle. As the bundle was unwrapped, rows upon rows of silver needles appeared before everyone's eyes, causing Megan Lee and Edward Green's expressions to change simultaneously. "The despicable scoundrel, you dare to ambush me? If you dare to make another move, I swear I'll chop your head off." Edward Green yelled in fear, pointing at Kyle Lincoln and cursing. "Such a loudmouth. It seems like in the future, you'll only be able to use your mouth to satisfy your woman." Kyle Lincoln sneered disdainfully at Edward Green, pulling out a silver needle. "You brat, just try touching me, and I'll kill you. Do you hear me?" Edward Green's face turned pale as sweat poured down his forehead like beads, his body trembling. He looked at Kyle Lincoln, his eyes brimming with tears. Kyle Lincoln smiled and said, "Relax, I'm a doctor. I specialize in curing people. Guaranteed, my needles cure the illness." As he spoke, Kyle Lincoln placed his hand on Edward Green, swiftly pressing 2 acupuncture points along his spine. Edward Green's body immediately stiffened, his already pained face contorted further as his wrists throbbed in agony. He gritted his teeth, his eyes wide with pain, but he couldn't move. "Why you? How are you so skilled? What did you do to him?" Megan Lee stared in astonishment at Edward Green, who was writhing in pain. She wanted to reach out but hesitated, afraid of Kyle Lincoln, and instead sat frozen in place, speaking timidly. Kyle Lincoln ignored Megan Lee and her words. Without sparing her a glance, he pulled out the silver needle and quickly inserted it into Edward Green's origin pass acupuncture point. Pure energy surged through the silver needle directly into the origin pass point. Edward Green's face, which had been twisted in pain, suddenly changed as his lower body swelled unnaturally. Kyle Lincoln nodded in satisfaction, pulling out 2 more silver needles and swiftly inserting them into the central extreme, sea of chi, and meeting in points using a reinforcement technique. Energy surged directly through the pathways. "Ah!" Edward Green suddenly let out a loud scream. His arms regained motion as he immediately grabbed at his lower body. "Edward Green, what are you doing?" Megan Lee cried out in terror, tears streaming down her face as she shouted at him. Edward Green's face was filled with anguish. With one hand, he quickly unfastened his pants, grabbing his throbbing member. In less than 2 seconds, a stream of essence shot out, soaking his trousers. Kyle Lincoln smirked, watching Edward Green, who was now completely incapacitated and destined to remain this way for life. He chuckled and said, "Megan Lee, so it turns out you like men who finish early? No wonder you came to mock me, turns out you were just bragging about how your husband is a premature ejaculator." Megan Lee stared in shock at Edward Green's now powerless state, standing frozen, unable to say a word. Kyle Lincoln, I was wrong. I was wrong. I beg you, please save him. He can't stay like this. If he stays like this." Megan Lee clung tightly to Kyle Lincoln's pant leg, pleading desperately. "Ha, What's the matter? Didn't you call me a premature ejaculator earlier? Why aren't you saying it now? Kyle Lincoln sneered, looking down at Megan Lee with disdain. No, I was wrong. I misspoke. I'm sorry, Kyle Lincoln. Please forgive me. Megan Lee cried, tears streaming down her face as she begged. Too bad, I can't cure this condition. You'd better find another expert. Hurry up, or this man will remain limp for the rest of his life. Enjoy it yourself. Haha. With that, Kyle Lincoln laughed heartily, turned, and walked toward the wine cellar, not sparing Megan Lee or Edward Green another glance. Megan Lee looked at Edward Green, whose face had turned pale, and couldn't help but burst into tears. She no longer dared to confront Kyle Lincoln and hurriedly, along with her subordinates, helped Edward Green leave White's wandering kitchen in a panic to seek medical treatment. In the blink of an eye, a night had passed. After the events of the previous evening, Kyle Lincoln's mood had improved significantly. Early in the morning, he prepared several large bottles of fragrant wine elixir and handed them over to William White. With the fragrant wine elixir, William White's spirits were immediately lifted, and he couldn't stop thanking Kyle Lincoln as he carefully accepted the bottles. Uncle William, if you truly want to sell Spirit of the Azure Spring long-term and make more money, you must invest. Kyle Lincoln said seriously while looking at William White. William White's face twitched as he looked at Kyle Lincoln, his eyes darting back and forth. Then tell me, how much would I need to invest? White's wandering kitchen has never made any money, and with young Master Arthur Gold suppressing us, it's even harder to earn anything. I still have to raise my children, I really don't have much money. If it requires a big investment, then... Uncle William, I haven't even said anything yet, why are you already complaining? Moreover, this is to help White's wandering kitchen make more money. If you don't want to, then forget it. Kyle Lincoln covered his ears, speaking helplessly to William White. Wait. I'll invest. Just tell me, how much do you need? William White's face was full of reluctance, but he couldn't bring himself to refuse. Kyle Lincoln thought for a moment. Back in the 25th century, fragrant wine was not exactly everywhere, but it was relatively easy to find. In the 21st century, however, it was extremely rare, with only one plant available, making it nearly impossible to produce a large quantity of fragrant wine elixir. Here's the deal, Uncle William. You need to build a large greenhouse where the temperature can't be too high, and there must be no direct sunlight, it has to be a shaded area. Additionally, you need to purchase at least a few truckloads of high-quality maiden's blush. Only then will there be a chance to mass-produce fragrant wine elixir, allowing you to sell Spirit of the Azure Spring on a grand scale, Kyle Lincoln said after thinking for a while. What? A few truckloads of maiden's blush? You brat, do you have any idea how hard it is to find maiden's blush right now? Good quality maiden's blush is even rarer. And you're asking for several truckloads? Even if I wanted to spend the money, I might not be able to find it. William White glared and shouted loudly. That's your problem, Uncle. I can't help with that. Your wine cellar has maiden's blush, you must have a way. Figure it out yourself. I have work to do, so I won't talk to you anymore. Kyle Lincoln shrugged helplessly and turned to leave White's wandering kitchen. Brother Kyle, wait for me. I'm coming with you. Bianca White ran down from upstairs, completely ignoring William White, and directly grabbed Kyle Lincoln's arm. Hey! What's going on here? Since when did you two become so close? Let go of him right now. William White shouted in dissatisfaction, quickly stepping forward to pull Bianca White away. Bianca White shot William White a disapproving glance and held onto Kyle Lincoln's hand tightly as they walked out of White's wandering kitchen. About yesterday, thank you for helping me out. I really wouldn't have known what to do without you, Kyle Lincoln said gratefully to Bianca White. Bianca White glanced downward at Kyle Lincoln and giggled, "Don't worry, brother Kyle. I'll definitely help you solve your problem. There won't be any issues. I'll go find a few of my senior classmates, they specialize in urology. They can absolutely cure you." "No, Bianca, that's not what you think." "I'm not, the bus is here. Hurry up and get on." Bianca White suddenly shouted, cutting off Kyle Lincoln mid-sentence as she ran toward the bus. Kyle Lincoln reluctantly followed behind Bianca White, quickly stepping onto the overcrowded bus. Bianca White, accustomed to the hustle and bustle of public transport, felt nothing unusual. She boarded first, immediately pushed further inside by the crowd, while Kyle Lincoln ended up near the door, his body almost pressed against the glass. It was the morning rush hour, and the bus was packed to the brim, so much so that even the driver's gear lever struggled to move. Kyle Lincoln, pressed against the window, tilted his head to glance at the dense crowd inside, but Bianca White's figure had already disappeared from sight. He shook his head helplessly and turned to look at the scenery outside. At every stop, as some passengers got off, the bus became slightly less crowded. Finally, Kyle Lincoln found a bit of space to turn around and search for Bianca White. "I can't let this go on. Before getting off, I must clear everything up with Bianca White. Otherwise, if she really goes looking for a doctor to treat me, I won't even be able to live as a man anymore," Kyle Lincoln thought to himself, standing on tiptoes to search for Bianca White. At that moment, Bianca White had no idea Kyle Lincoln was looking for her. She was squeezed in the middle of the bus, with barely enough room to place her feet. She clung tightly to the overhead bar, unable to move. Students of the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing all wore uniforms. Despite being a university with relatively relaxed management, it was one of the most prestigious institutions in the country, naturally maintaining its unique regulations and style. Uniforms were an essential part of this, and every student was required to wear them. The female students' uniforms consisted of a black one-piece dress that hugged their figure, paired with a white shirt on top and a short black skirt reaching just above the thighs. The outfit resembled professional attire, accentuating their perfect silhouettes. Bianca White, already stunningly beautiful with an impeccable figure, exuded an irresistible charm in her uniform. With so many people on the bus, Bianca White couldn't clearly see those around her. She only felt her body being jostled from all sides, making it difficult to even breathe. However, amidst the crowded chaos, a greedy hand stealthily slipped into Bianca White's backpack. Judging by the speed and precision of the act, the perpetrator was clearly experienced. Just as the thief was about to retract their hand, they suddenly felt someone firmly gripping the backpack. Bianca White tried to turn her head in alarm, but the space around her was too tight. She could only catch a glimpse of a face riddled with acne, resembling a potato, with squinty eyes fixed intently on her backpack. The thief abruptly looked up, locking eyes with Bianca White. She bit her lip, instinctively wanting to find Kyle Lincoln, but the bus was too crowded, and she couldn't spot him anywhere. "Hey, girl, if you scream, hand over all your valuables, or I'll kill you," the thief threatened, refusing to abandon his intentions, speaking menacingly to Bianca White. Encountering such a situation for the first time, Bianca White was terrified. Instinctively, she wanted to flee, but the thief kept advancing toward her. Panic surged within her as she tried to move, but the towering crowd surrounding her made it impossible for her feeble strength to push through. "Don't move, girl. Just hand over the money quietly, and I won't hurt you. You wouldn't want that pretty body of yours to end up with a scar, would you?" A threatening voice came from behind Bianca White. She could distinctly feel something cold pressing against her back, the sharp pain making it clear what it was. Bianca White was so frightened she almost burst into tears. She wanted to call for help but was terrified that the thief might actually harm her. Paralyzed by fear, she stood frozen in place, unable to move. However, the thief behind was clearly afraid that Bianca White would scream. Even though he kept talking, he did not take any actual action. "Don't move, behave yourself." The thief's voice sounded once again from behind, speaking to Bianca White. "Take out the money." The bus started moving again, and the jolting sensation made Bianca White feel the cold object behind her getting closer to her skin. "Get away from me, or I'll call for help," Bianca White said in panic to the figure behind her. At that moment, with so many people on the bus, Bianca White couldn't turn around to resist, and she was also afraid that the thief might act recklessly and harm her. "I'm only after money, not lives. If you don't cooperate, don't blame me for being ruthless." The thief was clearly growing impatient, pressing the cold, hard object against Bianca White's back once more. Tears streamed down Bianca White's face as fear drained the color from her cheeks. She froze in place, unsure of what to do, her mind buzzing endlessly. The thief reached into Bianca White's backpack again, rummaging through it. After a while, he found only 200 cash and a phone. As he tried to search further, the bus suddenly jolted. "Is this all you have?" The thief glared fiercely at Bianca White. The cramped space on the bus made it difficult for the thief to get close to Bianca White. As he pushed through the crowd, the bus suddenly braked sharply, forcing him to step back. For a moment, he couldn't reach Bianca White's backpack. In frustration, he applied force, and the cold object stabbed directly into Bianca White. Bianca White, terrified, hurriedly moved forward, trying to get away from the thief. Unexpectedly, the cold object suddenly pierced her back, and a sharp pain radiated from the spot. "Ah!" The intense pain made Bianca White scream, but her piercing cry only caused a few people to glance at her briefly. After murmuring an apology, they shifted their feet and paid no further attention to her. "Trying to run? I haven't even started today, and you're offering me this measly amount? Are you mocking me?" The thief, reeking of foul breath, snarled at Bianca White. "I really don't have any more money," Bianca White pleaded, struggling desperately. "No money? Cards will do, debit cards, credit cards, tell me all the passwords." The thief's sinister voice came from behind Bianca White, and her tears flowed uncontrollably. "Credit cards? Ha, you really should steal some IQ instead. With your intelligence, resorting to robbery is such a waste. How about this, my family has a dog named Lucky, and I'll let you take over its job as a guard." Suddenly, a mocking voice came from behind the thief. His body visibly trembled, and the hand he had raised froze midair. Who are you? This has nothing to do with you, back off, or I'll stab you to death." The thief stammered, his voice trembling with fear. "Tisk, holding a broken pen and threatening to stab someone? Do you really think you're that powerful?" The mocking voice rang out again. Chapter 34, leader of the anti-pickpocket team Bianca White was at the front, but the mocking voice that had just sounded out, even amidst the noisy bus, instantly made her recognize the owner of the voice behind her. Brother Kyle. Save me. Bianca White let out a loud, pitiful cry, her voice overpowering all the noise on the bus. The loud cry startled everyone on the bus, especially the men standing near Bianca White, who were so frightened they quickly turned their heads, looking at her in shock. Miss, I didn't step on your foot, why are you crying? Besides, stepping on a foot doesn't hurt that much, does it? Wait a minute, no, there's blood running down this young lady's back. Various voices erupted on the bus, and the bus driver, alarmed, hurriedly stopped the vehicle and began pushing his way toward Bianca White. As the bus came to a sudden stop, the thief became somewhat frightened, his face panicked as he looked at Kyle Lincoln. He raised a ballpoint pen toward him and said, "Kid, I'm telling you, this has nothing to do with you. Get lost and let me go, or I'll kill you today." Kyle Lincoln raised an eyebrow and said, "You want to kill me? I'd rather you steal some IQ first. You still want to kill me? Such kindness wasted on the ungrateful. Fine, go ahead and kill me then." Kyle Lincoln's defiant demeanor left the thief dumbfounded, staring at him, not knowing what to say. "I'll kill you." The thief finally snapped out of it after a long pause, gritting his teeth as he thrust the ballpoint pen straight toward Kyle Lincoln's chest. Such a shallow attack was no threat to Kyle Lincoln. In fact, it didn't even warrant his attention. As the pen came within a fist's distance of his chest, Kyle Lincoln reached out and grabbed the thief's wrist firmly. "Ow, it hurts, let go, let go." The thief felt as though his wrist was about to snap. Sweat poured down his forehead as he screamed in agony, his face contorting in pain. Kyle Lincoln looked at the thief with disdain and, with his other hand, delivered a powerful punch to the thief's stomach. Kyle Lincoln used his full strength in this punch, enhanced by spiritual energy. With just one blow, the thief collapsed to his knees, his body trembling uncontrollably. Sweat dripped continuously from his forehead. He couldn't move, let alone breathe properly. "Finally caught you. Let's see where you'll run this time." Before Kyle Lincoln could say more, a figure rushed over from the back of the bus. "Who are you?" Kyle Lincoln asked, puzzled as he looked at the approaching figure. "Oh, I'm Lucas Evans, the leader of the anti-pickpocket team from the police department." The man replied, pulling out his badge to show Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln, not really knowing how to verify it, simply said, "If you're a cop, then I'll leave this guy to you. My friend is injured, we need to go now." Lucas Evans glanced at Bianca White, who was crouched on the ground, blood continuously flowing from her back and beginning to darken. He nodded and said, "You two can go now, just give me your names." "I am Kyle Lincoln. If you need anything from me, just say it directly. I work at the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing's medical department." Kyle Lincoln said as he carried Bianca White in one arm and turned to head toward the rear door. Kyle Lincoln subdued the pickpocket swiftly. The entire process took less than half a minute. Many passengers on the bus hadn't even had time to react before the pickpocket was completely overpowered. The pickpocket on the bus had caused immense anger and disgust among the passengers. Now that someone had dealt with this scoundrel, everyone on the bus was deeply grateful. They looked at Kyle Lincoln as though he were a hero, quickly making way for him to reach the rear door. The bus driver, not wanting to delay, promptly opened the door. Kyle Lincoln got out of the car, glanced around for direction, and carried Bianca White toward the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing. The bus stop wasn't far from the Mid-Sea Academy of Healing. After running for a few minutes, Kyle Lincoln reached the main gate. Without hesitation, he headed straight for the medical room. The university campus was already bustling with students in the morning. Seeing Kyle Lincoln carrying Bianca White inside, their eyes were filled with curiosity or envy. Kyle Lincoln ignored those gazes and quickly brought Bianca White to medical room number 5. He pushed open the door, placed Bianca White on the hospital bed. The medical room was empty. Usually, Kyle Lincoln arrived early every day, and since Victoria Storm had classes, it was always past 9 when others showed up. Without paying attention to the emptiness, Kyle Lincoln laid Bianca White face down on the bed. He then grabbed her clothes and tore them apart. Black blood. There must be something filthy in this pen. A wound like this shouldn't get infected so quickly. Who knows how many things this pen has been in contact with? Kyle Lincoln frowned, staring at the wound on Bianca White's back. It hurts. It hurts. I feel so cold, so cold. Bianca White suddenly murmured, wrapping her arms tightly around herself with a pained expression. Why is she feeling cold? There's absolutely no poison on this pen. Why is she suddenly in so much pain? Kyle Lincoln thought to himself, perplexed, as he carefully examined Bianca White's wound. A row of white buttons came into view, revealing her smooth, jade-like back. Her slender waist was so captivating that any man would find it hard to resist touching it. However, Kyle Lincoln had no time to dwell on such thoughts. He stood up, grabbed a cotton swab soaked in alcohol, and cleaned the blood around the wound. Ah, it hurts. Bianca White murmured, her body instinctively twitching. Earlier, when Bianca White was injured by the pen, her inner garment had already been torn. Now, as she moved, the row of white buttons on her clothing suddenly came undone, slipping down to her armpit. Her full, voluptuous curves pressed directly against the bed, the flawless, snow-white outline appearing before Kyle Lincoln's eyes. His gaze flickered momentarily, and he couldn't help but swallow hard. Such a troublemaker? Being beautiful is truly a curse. Kyle Lincoln muttered to himself, quickly turning around to grab his silver needles from the desk. Traditional medicine treatment is Kyle Lincoln's expertise. He remembers every acupuncture point with precision. For treating any illness, as long as the 9 needles of the sun god technique is applied, Kyle Lincoln can fundamentally cure most conditions, except for particularly stubborn diseases. Bianca White suffered from a wound infection, and the infected blood needed to be completely extracted to eliminate the danger. The wound was deep and long, making it extremely challenging to expel all the infected blood. Kyle Lincoln examined Bianca White's back wound, quickly took out a silver needle, and located the spirit path, gate of destiny, and yang pass points before inserting the needles directly. A mystical golden glow emanated from the silver needle as pure spiritual energy flowed through it into Bianca White's body, rejuvenating her. Ugh! Bianca White groaned in pain, her brows furrowed tightly. Kyle Lincoln ignored Bianca White's reaction, his eyes fixed on the acupuncture points. He then took out 3 more silver needles, targeting the body pillar, wind mansion, and reaching yang points, using a draining technique to insert them. These 6 acupuncture points typically have no role in treating back bleeding. However, when combined with Kyle Lincoln's 9 needles of the sun god technique, they were given a unique healing effect. Pure spiritual energy entered Bianca White's body, and the faint golden light continued to flow into her. The dark blood gradually turned bright red, and the wound began to heal. Kyle Lincoln sighed in relief. Luckily, he had acted promptly and was skilled in the 9 needles of the sun god technique. Otherwise, treating such a severe and deep infection would have been nearly impossible. The draining technique required time and couldn't be rushed. Simply inserting and removing the needles immediately would not only fail to extract the toxic blood but could also worsen the condition. Kyle Lincoln glanced at Bianca White lying on the bed. Her flawless, snow-white skin and smooth back, coupled with her alluring figure, were enough to make any man struggle to resist the urge to touch. Sigh, thankfully it's her back. If it were the front, I wouldn't be able to handle it. She's too captivating. Kyle Lincoln muttered to himself. Women from the 21st century were indeed more beautiful and alluring than those from the 25th century. They didn't wear restrictive cultivation robes but instead boldly showcased their figures, revealing as much as possible. After a moment of thought, Kyle Lincoln shook his head, checked the time, and began removing the needles one by one. Though the draining and supplementing techniques were different, for Kyle Lincoln, they served the same purpose, to help the patient recover quickly. Regardless of the method used, the goal was the same. Kyle Lincoln carefully removed each needle. When he reached the last one at the Wind Mansion point, Bianca White suddenly groaned and turned over abruptly, her hand reaching toward Kyle Lincoln. There's still 1 needle left. Be careful, it might break. Kyle Lincoln shouted in alarm, quickly pulling out the final needle. Otherwise, Bianca White could have faced even greater danger. I'm so cold, so cold, so cold. Bianca White murmured with her eyes closed, seemingly unaware that the only piece of cloth covering her had shifted, leaving her exposed in Kyle Lincoln's view. Kyle Lincoln tried not to look, but the scene was too tempting, especially her snow-white curves, as if sculpted from flawless jade, emitting a faint fragrance that captivated him. Gulp! The sound of Kyle Lincoln swallowing was audible. Startled, he quickly turned away, eager to escape the awkward and enticing situation. Don't go, hold me, I'm so cold. Suddenly, Bianca White sat up and clung tightly to Kyle Lincoln, her soft body and full chest pressing against his back. I really can't take this anymore. Kyle Lincoln cried out helplessly, grabbing Bianca White's arms. Chapter 35, The Fictional Master, Kyle Lincoln, you're up early for work. A clear voice rang out from outside, and soon the figure of Victoria Storm appeared in the infirmary. The atmosphere in the infirmary instantly became awkward. Victoria Storm stood at the door, looking at Kyle Lincoln being held tightly by a pair of fair, lotus-like arms, her snow-white skin pressed against him, and her white underwear slightly shifting. Kyle Lincoln swallowed hard, inwardly lamenting his misfortune. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Kyle Lincoln, this kind of behavior is not allowed in the infirmary, Victoria Storm said quickly, her face reddening, before turning to leave. Wait, Victoria Storm, don't go, it's not what you think. Kyle Lincoln exclaimed, unable to explain himself. A stunning beauty was pressing herself against him, her full, round chest pushing against the back of his hand. Her small, soft hands were gently caressing his chest, igniting a fire within him. If this continued, he feared he wouldn't be able to control himself and might act on impulse with Bianca White right then and there. Currently, Kyle Lincoln hadn't reached the foundation establishment stage. If he were to lose his virginity now, it would hinder his future cultivation. Therefore, he had to endure. What do you mean it's not what I think? Her underwear has even fallen off. Look, that. Victoria Storm suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her face turning an even deeper shade of red, and she hurried out of the room. Hey, Victoria Storm, please help me. Bianca White was injured and I'm trying to save her. She's running a high fever due to an infected wound, and that's why she's cold and holding on to me. Please come here and help me, so I can treat her. Kyle Lincoln called out loudly, his face weary, as he began struggling to free himself. But as soon as he struggled, Bianca White clung to him even tighter. Her ample chest pressed firmly between his arms, and her shivering body caused her embrace to rise and fall rhythmically. The scene made a wave of heat surge through Kyle Lincoln, rushing straight to his nose. Oh no! Kyle Lincoln thought to himself. Before he could lift his hand, blood began to trickle from his nose. Kyle Lincoln felt like crying but had no tears. Victoria Storm had already misunderstood him, and now with his nosebleed, no one would believe he was genuinely trying to treat Bianca White. Victoria Storm bit her lip as she looked at Kyle Lincoln. Though she didn't step forward, she closed the infirmary door and stood outside, watching him and Bianca White. At this moment, Bianca White was completely unclothed, her full, round chest pressed against Kyle Lincoln's arm. Victoria Storm, stop just standing there and help me, please. Kyle Lincoln turned his head toward her, his face full of helplessness. Oh, what should I do? Why is your nose bleeding? Victoria Storm was about to speak when she noticed Kyle Lincoln's nose was bleeding profusely, staining his white lab coat. Kyle Lincoln helplessly shook his head and pointed at Bianca White. Victoria Storm paused for a moment, then nodded in understanding. Indeed, with such a stunning beauty by your side, exuding charm and intimacy like that, any ordinary man would find it hard to resist. Bianca White was still clinging to Kyle Lincoln's arm, rubbing up and down. This action alone was enough to make anyone lose composure, let alone Kyle Lincoln, who was directly experiencing it. Victoria Storm hesitated for a moment but then quickly stepped forward, gently pulling Bianca White into her embrace. Victoria Storm, could you help her put some clothes on first? I can't continue the treatment like this. Kyle Lincoln said awkwardly, turning around to hurriedly grab some tissues. After plugging both nostrils, the nosebleed finally stopped. Kyle Lincoln breathed heavily through his mouth, looking at Bianca White, who had already dressed. This little girl is truly a temptress. If what she said about 7 times a night is true, no matter how strong my constitution is, I'd be completely drained. Kyle Lincoln thought helplessly as he reached for a set of silver needles. The moment the needles were in his hand, Kyle Lincoln's gaze turned sharp, and the playful, carefree demeanor from earlier disappeared. His handsome face took on a serious expression that made it hard for anyone not to take a second look. Victoria Storm stood beside him, observing Kyle Lincoln's expression. Unknowingly, her heartbeat quickened, and she felt a strange flutter, as if a fawn had bumped into her chest. What am I even thinking? Victoria Storm quickly shook her head, muttering to herself. Kyle Lincoln didn't hear Victoria Storm's words. Holding the silver needles in both hands, he swiftly used acupuncture techniques to insert them into the great hammer and Shaosheng points. Pure spiritual energy flowed directly into the acupoints, forcing all the excess heat out of Bianca White's body. Phew! After a while of hard work, Kyle Lincoln was drenched in sweat, especially since the stunning beauty earlier had been rubbing against him, making him sweat even more uncontrollably. All right, Let her rest well and drink some herbal medicine. She'll be fine, Kyle Lincoln said wearily, slumping into a chair. Victoria Storm looked at Kyle Lincoln suspiciously. Just 2 needles? And although those acupoints are used to treat fevers, it shouldn't be possible to cure it so thoroughly and so quickly, should it? Doubtful, Victoria Storm took out a thermometer, placing it under Bianca White's arm. After waiting a few minutes, she checked it and saw that the temperature had indeed returned to normal. Kyle Lincoln, how did you do that? Traditional Chinese medicine typically relies on acupuncture as the primary treatment and herbal medicine as a supplement. But being able to reduce a fever in one session, no doctor has ever achieved that level of skill. Victoria Storm asked curiously, sitting in front of Kyle Lincoln like a child eager to learn. Kyle Lincoln thought to himself, doctors nowadays wouldn't have the ability. They don't know the 9 needles of the sun god, and they don't have spiritual energy. How could they achieve such results? Ugh, I'm exhausted. Stop asking me questions. It's just a simple treatment technique my master taught me. Kyle Lincoln dodged the question, casually inventing an imaginary master to cover it up. He then slumped over the table, pretending to sleep. Kyle Lincoln. Victoria Storm hesitated for a long time before gently shaking the sleeping Kyle Lincoln. What are you doing? Kyle Lincoln groggily sat up, his face filled with confusion as he asked. Your nose is bleeding. Victoria Storm pointed at Kyle Lincoln's nose, speaking softly. Kyle Lincoln was startled, reaching up to touch his nose. He realized that at some point, the tissue he had placed there had disappeared, and now blood was streaming down uncontrollably, leaving him in a messy state. The nosebleed was so severe it could probably break a Guinness World Record. Kyle Lincoln spent over half an hour fumbling in the restroom before finally stopping the bleeding. However, his white lab coat was now completely stained with blood. If an outsider saw him, they might think Kyle Lincoln had just performed some kind of intense surgery. This won't do. I need to start cultivating quickly and reach the foundation establishment stage. Only then can I break through this situation. Otherwise, facing so many patients every day will drive me insane. I can't keep enduring this. Kyle Lincoln vowed to himself in front of the mirror, setting a lofty goal to save lives and also resolve his own predicament. Who's Kyle Lincoln? Suddenly, an extremely arrogant voice echoed loudly from outside the medical room. Kyle Lincoln, still in the restroom, heard it clearly. He was puzzled. At Mid-Sea Academy of Healing, the only person he really knew was Bianca White, who was currently in the patient ward. So, who could possibly be looking for him? Despite his confusion, Kyle Lincoln quickly opened the door and walked out. Classmate, are you feeling unwell somewhere? If so, please sit down, and I'll take a look. Victoria Storm asked politely, her expression calm, as she addressed a male student in uniform. Do I need you to check me? What do you even know? Stop pretending in front of me. The male student rudely retorted with an arrogant tone, his square head held high as he completely disregarded Victoria Storm. Victoria Storm's expression noticeably changed. However, being in the medical room, she couldn't lose her temper. She forced herself to respond, if you're not here for a checkup, then why are you looking for Dr. Lincoln? Why? I'm Marcus Monroe, a second-year student at Mid-Sea Academy of Healing. I'm also the top clinical medicine student here this year. I heard there's a doctor named Kyle Lincoln in the medical room who's supposedly amazing, curing incurable diseases instantly. I don't believe in such a miraculous doctor, so I'm here to challenge him. If you're not Kyle Lincoln, then step aside. I'm not here for you, Marcus Monroe arrogantly declared, glaring at Victoria Storm as if she were insignificant. Victoria Storm, a highly talented graduate student at Mitzi Academy of Healing and the granddaughter of Professor Alexander Gold, had already achieved an impressive level of medical expertise. Yet here she was, being belittled in her own medical room. As a doctor, she couldn't respond too harshly, but the insult left her fuming. Her chest heaved with anger, and the proud curves of her figure rose and fell with her breaths, a sight that made Kyle Lincoln's nose start to heat up again. Terrified, Kyle Lincoln quickly covered his nose and stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of Victoria Storm. He looked at Marcus Monroe and said, "Kid, have your feathers even grown in yet? Challenging me? First, go fix that bird's nest on your head. You call yourself the top student? Aren't you afraid that when you perform surgery, your hair will fall into the patient's wound and cost them their life?" Marcus Monroe nearly fainted from rage at Kyle Lincoln's words. His carefully styled, artistic hairstyle had just been insulted as a bird's nest. Who is this punk? Talking nonsense here. Get lost and go play somewhere else. Marcus Monroe shouted angrily, pointing at Kyle Lincoln. Humph, weren't you looking for me? If I go play somewhere else, what will you play with? Kyle Lincoln retorted disdainfully, glaring at Marcus Monroe with a deep voice. What? You are Kyle Lincoln? How can you be so young? Marcus Monroe was stunned, scrutinizing Kyle Lincoln from head to toe for a long moment before exclaiming in disbelief. Uncle, is it a crime to be young? Who said I was old? Kyle Lincoln retorted, clearly dissatisfied, and spoke without reservation. Who are you calling uncle, huh? Marcus Monroe was so furious he nearly fainted, stumbling a couple of steps as he pointed at Kyle Lincoln and shouted. Chapter 36, Don't worry, I know my limits. Standing behind Kyle Lincoln, Victoria Storm covered her mouth, giggling softly. Despite Kyle Lincoln's seemingly carefree demeanor, resembling a spoiled playboy, his words were sharp and biting, showing no regard for his opponent. Every sentence he uttered struck a nerve, yet not a single vulgar word was used. I'm calling your grandpa. Kyle Lincoln grinned cheekily at Marcus Monroe. Your grandpa. Your grandpa. What started as fiery anger quickly devolved into a back-and-forth exchange of your grandpa insults. The commotion grew so loud that it attracted the attention of doctors from other medical rooms, who all gathered at the doorway to watch the scene unfold. What's going on here? Why so noisy? Suddenly, an authoritative voice rang out from outside. A tall, muscular figure pushed through the crowd and strode into medical room number 5. The moment the brawny man appeared, all the other doctors fell silent, and those who had been joining in the fun quickly stepped back. Even Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but fall silent, his gaze fixed on the imposing man who had entered. You're the new doctor, Kyle Lincoln? The brawny man asked in a deep voice, looking at Kyle Lincoln. This is our deputy head of the medical department, Harold Monroe. Aside from my grandfather, he holds the most authority here. He has a very strict temperament, so be careful. Victoria Storm whispered softly to Kyle Lincoln from behind, tugging at his sleeve. Kyle Lincoln made a mental note of her words, then looked at Harold Monroe and said, Deputy Head Monroe, I'm the new traditional medicine doctor, Kyle Lincoln. All right. What's with the blood on you? Harold Monroe asked coldly, his gaze falling on the bloodstains on Kyle Lincoln's clothes. Nosebleed. Kyle Lincoln answered bluntly. What? A nosebleed caused this much blood? Half your lab coat is covered in it, and it's all from a nosebleed? Harold Monroe asked incredulously. Kyle Lincoln nodded and replied, the weather's hot, and I've been overheated, so I had a nosebleed. It's nothing serious. Harold Monroe looked from Kyle Lincoln to Marcus Monroe and then asked, what's going on between the two of you? This is a medical room, yet you're shouting, your grandpa, back and forth. How are the other doctors supposed to treat their patients? I want to challenge Kyle Lincoln. I don't believe his medical skills are as miraculous as people say. Marcus Monroe shouted indignantly, pointing at Kyle Lincoln. Challenge? Someone actually came to the medical room to issue a challenge? As soon as Marcus Monroe finished speaking, some doctors outside began murmuring, their whispers constantly reaching Kyle Lincoln's ears. Mid-Sea Academy of Healing is full of outstanding and intelligent students. The students here take courses in both traditional and modern medicine. After graduation, they are destined to become doctors at major hospitals or private physicians for leaders. Naturally, they are proud and competitive. Working in the medical room of Mid-Sea Academy of Healing requires careful handling. Otherwise, these students might indeed come to challenge, and losing would be a disgrace at the academy. Therefore, the medical room of Mid-Sea Academy of Healing has a special rule: outsiders are not allowed to challenge the doctors of the medical room. If violated, the matter will be reported to the school, leading to disciplinary action. Of course, this only applies if the doctor in the medical room refuses the challenge. This has always been an unspoken rule in the medical room, well understood by everyone. Now, someone actually wants to challenge Kyle Lincoln, and all the doctors' eyes gleamed with anticipation, as if ready to enjoy a good show. Our medical room does not allow challenges. This has been a long-standing rule. You're a second-year student, how could you not know this rule? Harold Monroe shouted at Marcus Monroe. Why forbid challenges? Medicine is inherently a continuous learning process. Diseases in this world keep emerging, and there are countless illnesses we've never encountered before. If we remain stagnant and refuse to improve, we will never achieve anything. We challenge each other only to grow together. The academy allows challenges, why shouldn't the medical room? Or are the doctors in your medical room so incompetent that they fear losing? Marcus Monroe sneered arrogantly, looking down on Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln, once the leader of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, had never endured such humiliation. A mere young brat dared to act so insolently in front of him. In the past, Kyle Lincoln would have torn this kid apart without hesitation. Ridiculous. The doctors in our medical room are a professional and elite team. When have we ever feared a challenge? Since you want to challenge us, the medical room will not back down. Kyle Lincoln, do you agree to accept his challenge? Harold Monroe turned and asked Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln looked at Harold Monroe, whose eyes showed no anger but rather a sense of smug satisfaction, as if eager to see him fail. Kyle Lincoln's pride was immediately provoked. He looked at Marcus Monroe and nodded. I accept the challenge. Oh! As soon as Kyle Lincoln spoke, the entire medical room buzzed with excitement. Everyone turned their eyes to him, their faces lit with curiosity and anticipation. Director Monroe, Kyle Lincoln just joined the medical room. Isn't it unfair to let him face a challenge so soon? Victoria Storm, standing nearby, noticed the situation and stepped forward to speak to Harold Monroe. So, it's you, Dr. Storm. This is Kyle Lincoln's own decision, it has nothing to do with me. I'm only here to maintain order and ensure the medical room stays calm, Harold Monroe replied hurriedly, his tone noticeably weaker upon seeing Victoria Storm. Humph, Director Monroe, others might not know, but don't think I'm unaware of your little schemes. I see through you clearly, Victoria Storm said with disdain as she glared at Harold Monroe. Harold Monroe's face turned red and then pale, but he couldn't argue with Victoria Storm. After all, out of respect for her, he dared not offend her. While Victoria Storm herself might not be formidable, Henry Gold, her backing, was someone Harold Monroe couldn't afford to provoke. Doctors need to interact more to encourage progress. Since Kyle Lincoln has agreed, let's begin. Harold Monroe forced a smile, rubbing his hands as he spoke, then turned and walked out. Marcus Monroe cast a disdainful glance at Kyle Lincoln, snorted coldly, gave a thumbs-down gesture, and then swaggered out of medical room number 5. Kyle Lincoln, trust me, don't compete with him. Marcus Monroe is very skilled. Most importantly, Marcus Monroe is Harold Monroe's biological nephew. Victoria Storm whispered into Kyle Lincoln's ear, tugging at him. Oh? So that's the case. No wonder Harold Monroe's gaze towards me felt off. Kyle Lincoln nodded in understanding, speaking quietly. Let me tell you, actually, the spot in the medical room this time was supposed to be Marcus Monroe's. But because there were enough Western medicine practitioners and a lack of Eastern medicine practitioners, my grandfather allowed you to join. Marcus Monroe lost his chance to enter the medical room, which is why Harold Monroe holds a grudge. Now that my grandfather is out on an inspection today, Harold Monroe is using this opportunity to have Marcus Monroe provoke you. Right now, he's the highest authority here. Who would dare say a word? By the time my grandfather returns, the matter will have already been settled, and he won't be able to do anything about it. So, just don't go. Let's see what they can do. Victoria Storm anxiously pulled Kyle Lincoln, trying to persuade him. Kyle Lincoln glanced outside, let out a cold laugh, and said, if I don't go, wouldn't that mean I truly lack real ability? Later, Marcus Monroe could spread rumors around the school that I'm a fake quack. That would be even worse for my reputation. Don't worry, I know my limits. After speaking, Kyle Lincoln took hold of Victoria Storm's small hand. Although Victoria Storm practiced judo, her hand was incredibly soft and smooth, without a trace of calluses, making it feel tender and comfortable to the touch. Victoria Storm's face visibly turned red. She lowered her head, trying to pull her hand back, but Kyle Lincoln held it tightly. Please help me take care of Bianca White. Thank you. I'll treat you to ice cream later. Kyle Lincoln said gently to Victoria Storm, patting her soft, smooth hand before turning and walking away. Victoria Storm watched Kyle Lincoln's back, her face turning an even deeper shade of red, accompanied by a warm, flustered feeling. What's wrong with me? Could it be? No, no way. Victoria Storm, what are you thinking? Victoria Storm quickly patted her cheeks and turned to care for Bianca White. Marcus Monroe and the others came out, with other doctors trailing behind Harold Monroe as they headed toward another medical room. Marcus, this time you must give Kyle Lincoln a lesson, thoroughly defeat him. That way, I'll have the chance to kick Kyle Lincoln out of the medical room for good. Afterward, you'll officially be the doctor here. Harold Monroe whispered into Marcus Monroe's ear. Uncle, rest assured, I won't let you down. Marcus Monroe said confidently, patting his chest with pride. Harold Monroe nodded in satisfaction and entered medical room number 2. Medical room number 2 was originally designated for Western medicine. It was equipped with all kinds of devices and currently housed 2 patients lying on hospital beds, groaning in pain. The 2 patients appeared to be around 21 or 22 years old. One of their faces was completely distorted, making it impossible to recognize their original appearance. Their mouths twitched uncontrollably, their eyes and lips were misaligned, and saliva continuously dripped from the corners of their mouths. Marcus Monroe walked in front while Kyle Lincoln followed behind as they entered medical room number 2. These 2 are second-year students. Last night, they stayed up too late playing games, left the window slightly open, and fell asleep at their desks. When they woke up this morning, they were like this. Take a look and figure out how to treat them, Harold Monroe said, turning to Kyle Lincoln and Marcus Monroe. Kyle Lincoln and Marcus Monroe exchanged glances before each approached one of the patients in front of them. This is clearly facial paralysis caused by an invasion of pathogenic wind, resulting in blocked meridians and disrupted blood and qi circulation. Expelling the pathogenic wind will cure it. It's not a serious condition, Kyle Lincoln said calmly after just a glance, standing up as he spoke. This facial paralysis is due to a disorder in the facial nerve, leading to symptoms like crooked eyes and a slanted mouth. Treatment with antibiotics and nerve supplements can cure it. While it's a bit challenging, it's absolutely treatable. Marcus Monroe confidently declared, standing up and addressing Harold Monroe. Harold Monroe nodded in satisfaction and said, "Good. Since both of you have identified the cause, let's see how you propose to treat it. How long will it take for each of you to cure the patient?" "No more than 5 days." Marcus Monroe quickly interjected with an arrogant expression. "Half an hour," Kyle Lincoln responded calmly, without even looking at Harold Monroe, speaking in a soft voice. Chapter 37, temporarily untreatable. Although facial paralysis is not an incurable disease, it is undoubtedly one of the more stubborn conditions. Whether in traditional Chinese medicine or Western medicine, this ailment typically requires long-term treatment. Medications and acupuncture both demand significant time, and it's fundamentally impossible to achieve a complete cure in a short period. Kyle Lincoln, however, claimed he could cure it in just half an hour. This statement caused all the doctors gathered in the medical room to burst into laughter, pointing mockingly at Kyle Lincoln. "Kid, stop exaggerating. You're still wet behind the ears, and you dare to boast like that? Even if we gave you half a day, you wouldn't be able to do it." "Exactly. Showing off too much will only backfire. Just admit defeat. Marcus Monroe says he can cure it in 5 days, and even that's something we're not entirely sure about. He's that skilled. You should just go home, take a bath, and sleep." Ridiculing laughter filled the medical room, all directed at Kyle Lincoln. Kyle Lincoln sneered, ignoring the group of doctors. He turned around, retrieved his acupuncture kit, and placed it on a chair. "While I'm treating the patient, no outsiders are allowed to watch. Please leave. This is a competition between Marcus Monroe and me, it has nothing to do with the rest of you." Kyle Lincoln said coldly, exuding an invisible aura that swept over the gathered doctors. The icy demeanor, like a cold breeze in winter, made all the doctors shiver. They looked at Kyle Lincoln in shock, swallowing the mocking words they had been about to utter, unable to say anything further. "Fine, I'll see what you're capable of. You go first, and I'll wait outside. If you can't cure it in half an hour, you lose." At that point, get out of the medical room and leave Mitzi Academy of Healing. There's no place for you here. Marcus Monroe shouted mockingly, pointing at Kyle Lincoln. And if I win? Kyle Lincoln asked, narrowing his eyes slightly and speaking in a low tone as he looked at Marcus Monroe. If you win, I won't set foot in the medical room again, and whenever I see you, I'll call you a divine healer. Marcus Monroe replied decisively. If I lose my job. If you lose, you call me a divine healer? That doesn't seem fair. How about this? If you lose, you wear a sign reading, useless, and run 5 laps around the stadium at Mitzi Academy of Healing. How does that sound? Kyle Lincoln stood up, looking at Marcus Monroe with disdain. Marcus Monroe froze, quickly shaking his head. No way, I'm the genius of Mitzi Academy of Healing. If I do that, how could I still have any face left to stay here? So, are you afraid of losing? Kyle Lincoln countered. Afraid of losing? Me? That's ridiculous. Fine, I agree. If I lose, I'll wear that sign and run 5 laps around the stadium. Marcus Monroe's face turned red as he shouted without hesitation. Harold Monroe tugged hard on Marcus Monroe's sleeve, but couldn't stop him. Harold could only sigh, angrily tapping Marcus on the forehead before glaring at Kyle Lincoln and striding out. Are you out of your mind? Why would you agree to Kyle Lincoln's terms? What if you lose? If you wear that sign, I'm telling you, you'll never lift your head again at Mitzi Academy of Healing. Everyone will know you lost in the medical room. What kind of top student will you be then? How am I supposed to explain this to your parents? Harold Monroe angrily scolded Marcus as soon as they stepped outside. Relax, Uncle. That guy beating me? That's absurd. Trust me, in half an hour, we'll just sit back and enjoy the show. Facial paralysis? You know the condition better than anyone. You've been in medicine for 30 years. Have you ever seen a doctor that skilled? Marcus Monroe said confidently to Harold Monroe. Harold froze, thinking it over. Indeed, he had never encountered a doctor that extraordinary. Curing facial paralysis in 30 minutes? That was simply impossible, no physician could do it. With that thought, Harold felt more at ease, smiling as he contentedly returned to his office. Kyle Lincoln sat in the patient room, observing the 2 patients groaning on their beds. He reached for his silver needles. The 9 needles of the sun god technique was immediately employed. A faint golden light emanated from Kyle's fingertips, flickering briefly before vanishing. Without delay, Kyle swiftly began the acupuncture process. Using techniques like shallow needling and supplementary needling, he targeted acupoints such as Yang White, for Whites, Earth Spear, and Joining Valley, inserting the needles one by one. Ugh! The patient undergoing acupuncture let out a groan, their facial muscles twitching slightly. Kyle focused intently on the patient in front of him. For someone with facial paralysis, acupuncture would naturally be painful. However, the patient's anguished cries without any furrowing of the brows clearly indicated that their condition had affected the eyebrow muscles. Kyle picked up another silver needle and swiftly inserted it into the drilling bamboo acupoint with a shallow puncture. He then took another needle and targeted the welcoming fragrance acupoint, channeling pure spiritual energy through the needle toward the patient's facial muscles. The patient's muscles began to spasm rapidly, as if an electric current was coursing through them. Their facial expressions grew more animated, though it was unclear whether they were smiling or grimacing in pain. Kyle left each needle in place for 15 minutes, continuously. channeling pure spiritual energy into the facial meridians through each acupoint. The intense warmth caused the meridians to expand, improving blood flow. It hurts. The patient suddenly cried out, their eyebrows furrowing tightly. The sudden movement caused the silver needle at the drilling bamboo acupoint to twist. Kyle quickly withdrew it, removing the needle before reinserting it at the Rinjong acupoint. Gradually, the patient's face began to contort, little by little returning to normal. Their complexion grew rosier, and their cries became more coherent and natural. Kyle wiped the sweat from his forehead, a faint smile appearing on his pale cheeks. Fortunately, your condition didn't last long. If it had persisted for a longer time, with my current skills, I would have needed 3 days of acupuncture to fully cure you. Kyle Lincoln nodded with satisfaction, holding a silver needle in both hands as he quickly withdrew it. Half an hour is almost up, and there's still no movement inside. That Kyle Lincoln kid, I think this time he's really done for, about to be kicked out of the medical room. Exactly. That kid was so arrogant when he came in, even offending Dr. Lee and daring to sneak glances at Dr. Monroe. If he gets kicked out of the medical room, it'll save us a lot of trouble. Mocking voices echoed from the hallway, and everyone wore smug expressions, seemingly eager to see Kyle Lincoln leave the medical room immediately. Victoria Storm stood at the far end, her face growing increasingly grim as she listened to the doctor's sneers. What nonsense are you all spouting? Dr. Lincoln is a brilliant doctor. Do you think, with your level of medical skills, you could cure facial paralysis in just half an hour? Victoria Storm retorted sharply from behind. Ha! Facial paralysis is no big deal, but curing it in half an hour? Who would believe that? Exactly. Or is it because you're in the same medical room, and Kyle Lincoln has somehow charmed you into defending him? Some female doctors chimed in, sarcastically mocking Victoria Storm. Victoria Storm was so furious she was breathing heavily, glaring at the group of doctors in front of her, unable to find the words to respond. Half an hour is up. Let's go in. Suddenly, a sharp voice rang out from the front, and a crowd of people rushed into the medical room in a frenzy. Bang! The door to the medical room was flung open as the noisy group barged in. Kyle Lincoln had just finished his acupuncture session, his body drenched in sweat and so exhausted that he could barely keep his eyes open. The sudden intrusion startled him but also jolted his spirit awake. Kyle Lincoln, you've definitely lost this time. I don't believe you could cure facial paralysis in just half an hour. What? How is this possible? Marcus Monroe, who had been sneering at Kyle, froze mid-sentence as he noticed the patient, who had been lying on the bed earlier, now standing up as if nothing had happened. The patient's face was smooth and clear, devoid of any signs of paralysis. Marcus Monroe couldn't help but exclaim in shock. The mocking smiles on the faces of the other doctors in the room instantly froze. They stood dumbfounded at the doorway, staring blankly into the room, unable to utter a single word. Doctor, thank you so much. Without you, I don't know how much more I would have suffered. Can you treat my friend as well? The once paralyzed patient stood up, grabbing Kyle Lincoln's hand with gratitude. No. He's my patient. I can cure him too. Let me do it. Harold Monroe hurried into the room, shoving Marcus Monroe aside. Marcus quickly stepped forward, addressing the young man. Forget it. I don't trust you. This doctor here is much better, he cured me so quickly. Only he can treat my friend. Let him handle it. The young man dismissed Marcus Monroe without hesitation, his eyes fixed on Kyle Lincoln. Chapter 1, 6 Realms of Rebirth. A damp, soft sensation reached his fingertips, accompanied by the strong smell of earth. Kyle Lincoln slowly opened his eyes. The sight before him left him speechless. He was lying in a dirt pit, the ground beneath him loose and soft. Above the pit, trees were densely packed, and a figure stood there. Buried alive. The thought flashed through Kyle Lincoln's mind. He quickly sat up and scrambled out of the pit. Unexpectedly, the figure standing too close to the edge slipped and fell straight down. The sudden turn of events caught Kyle Lincoln off guard. Just as he climbed up, he was forcefully pressed back down. Poor Kyle Lincoln, before he could even think about retaliating, became a cushion for the other person. His head was shoved into the dirt, and the suffocating sensation instinctively made him grab onto the figure. The touch was silky smooth yet firm, like holding onto jelly. The sensation was so perfect that he couldn't help but squeeze twice before reluctantly letting go. What perfect legs! Wait! The figure's legs were on his stomach, so the thing pressed against his face, wasn't it her chest? Only now did Kyle Lincoln notice the sensation on his face. It was distinctly different from elsewhere, unusually soft and exuding a captivating fragrance. It wasn't the scent of any expensive perfume but the natural aroma of a young woman. Ouch, that hurts. A groan escaped as the young woman struggled to get off Kyle Lincoln. Suddenly, as if realizing something, she retreated in fear, stopping only at the edge of the pit. Her trembling finger pointed at Kyle Lincoln. You're dead. Am I dead? But I was definitely poisoned, Kyle Lincoln muttered, startled. He quickly examined himself and was immediately alarmed. The poison had already entered his bloodstream. If not treated in time, it would reach his heart, and even a god wouldn't be able to save him. Ignoring the frightened young woman, Kyle Lincoln lifted his shirt, pinched his index and middle fingers together as if they were silver needles, and began pressing on specific acupuncture points. Great Abyss, Celestial Pivot, Returning Essence, 9 points in total. His movements were so swift that in mere moments, it was done, leaving the young woman covering her mouth, almost screaming. Moments later, Kyle Lincoln felt a surge of heat rising from the 9 points, like a stream of hot spring water coursing through him. Gradually, the heat subsided, and he let out a sigh of relief. The 9 acupuncture points underwent a drastic transformation. From each point, a small amount of viscous fluid seeped out, looking incredibly strange. Amazing! The young woman exclaimed in awe, unable to contain herself. What did you just do? The toxins had been expelled, and naturally, his body was fine. It's just acupuncture, but unlike your acupuncture, I use qi as needles, a much more advanced technique. Kyle Lincoln's complexion became rosy, and he nodded slightly, saying, let's set this matter aside. Answer me one question, did I owe you money or harass you? Why did you bury me alive? Who buried you alive? When I found you, you were already dead. The young girl's face turned bright red as she muttered softly, I was about to report to the police, but then you faked being dead and dragged me down with you. If I hadn't reincarnated into this body, he really would have been dead. Kyle Lincoln thought to himself, memories flooding back like tidal waves. Kyle Lincoln came from the 25th century, an era of cultivators. According to the history he knew, cultivators already existed in the 21st century. By the 25th century, the wave of cultivation had reached its peak, and almost everyone had become the kind of cultivators once only found in novels. As for himself, he was the master of the order of the celestial physicians. With his cultivation at its peak, he had mastered the 9 needles of the sun god technique up to the 5th level. However, to break through further, he needed to find the world's ultimate Yin treasure, the mystic lunar herb. The mystic lunar herb was an extremely rare plant, often unseen for decades or even centuries. Unable to find it, Kyle Lincoln became obsessed with breaking through. Unwilling to accept failure, he forcibly attempted to break through, only to suffer a chi deviation, endure heavenly tribulation, and fall into the 6 realms of rebirth. The last memory he had was of the icy blue 9-layered heavenly lightning. When he woke up, he had become Kyle Lincoln, who had died from poisoning. This man had the same name as him, but his life was not much better. Chapter 2, 9 Needles of the Sun God of the Order of the Celestial Physicians. The Lincoln family he belonged to was once a prestigious clan. Unfortunately, they were sabotaged by enemies, losing their vast fortune. In an attempt to save the family, he took an arranged marriage contract made before their bankruptcy and married into another wealthy family. However, his body was weak, and on his wedding night, he lasted only 3 seconds. The next day, he earned the nickname, Mr. 3 Seconds. Afterward, he sought treatment everywhere but could not cure his premature ejaculation. His wife, frustrated, kicked him out of the house. In utter despair, he joined a secret clinical trial project, earning a small sum by testing experimental drugs. After the trial ended, he fainted while strolling down the street. Presumably, the reason he was buried here was that the person in charge of the clinical project discovered he lived alone and, unwilling to take responsibility, simply buried him here, leaving him to fend for himself. "If you're fine, then I'll be going." Seeing him lost in thought and silent, the young girl didn't want to stay any longer. She spoke and prepared to climb out of the dirt pit. However, the soil was soft and loose. She exerted uneven force, twisted her ankle, and fell backward. "Careful!" With a loud shout, Kyle Lincoln quickly reached out to catch the falling young girl. However, he didn't think about where he should or shouldn't touch, and both his hands slipped under her skirt, landing directly on her firm, round buttocks. Sorry." He quickly used his strength to help the young lady regain her balance. As he withdrew his hand, 2 black handprints were clearly visible on the underwear beneath her skirt. The young lady suddenly turned around, her face slightly flushed, her voice a mix of embarrassment and anger. "Why are you being so indecent? Let me tell you, I live nearby, and if you dare to act recklessly, I'll find someone to deal with you." Kyle Lincoln let out an awkward chuckle, his eyes darting around. He noticed they were in a forest, not far from a main road, and quickly changed the subject. "Where's your house? Let me walk you home." Although the poison in his body had been cleared, he was still dissatisfied with this ordinary human body. He decided to find a quiet place to properly cultivate the 9 needles of the sun god from the order of the celestial physicians. While practicing, he also needed to search for the mystic lunar herb. Even though the chances were slim, he had to try. The failures of his past life must not be repeated in this one. This young lady was the first person he met upon arriving in this world. The impression she left on him wasn't bad, so he decided to follow her home. "Why are you following me?" The young lady widened her eyes, crossing her arms in front of her chest, which only made her ample bosom appear even more prominent. "This girl is wild. I like it." Kyle Lincoln's heart was pure, but his face bore a mischievous grin. "Of course, I have ulterior motives. After that, I could even open my own shop." The young lady burst out laughing, unable to hold back her amusement as she teased him. "You're so annoying, but why did you try to kill yourself?" "Kill myself? This girl must have found me after those clinical project managers ran off, so she assumed I committed suicide." Kyle Lincoln pondered for a moment, then a wry smile appeared on his face. He didn't reveal the truth but casually made up a story. "I lost my job, my family, and even my girlfriend left me. I was so desperate that I thought I'd just end it all." Kyle Lincoln's performance truly painted the picture of a down-and-out man in the most vivid way possible. "There are people worse off than you. Should they all kill themselves too?" The girl glared at him, like a teacher scolding a naughty student. "Besides, if you die, your girlfriend won't pity you. She'll just look down on you even more." "You're right. I should pick myself up, find a better girlfriend, and make her furious." Kyle Lincoln's face lit up with excitement, then he stared at the girl and said, "Someone like you. Keep dreaming." The girl rolled her eyes before smiling slyly and saying, "You seem pitiful enough. I'll take you in. You can work as a servant at my house for now, and we'll see how it goes later." On the way while chatting, Kyle Lincoln learned some basic information about the girl. Her name was Bianca White. Her parents divorced very early, and she had lived with her father since childhood. Their livelihood depended on running the Forest specialty restaurant, William White. Chapter 3, Becoming a Tragedy. "Bianca, where have you been? We have an important guest at the restaurant, you need to help me welcome them." A reproachful voice echoed, followed by a short, stout man in his late 40s stepping out of the restaurant. Seeing Bianca White and Kyle Lincoln covered in dirt, William White immediately grew wary. He pulled Bianca behind him and stared at Kyle, demanding, "Who are you, and why are you with my daughter?" "Father, he's my friend. He wants to work at the restaurant," Bianca quickly explained. "On the way back, I accidentally fell, and he helped me, so he got dirty too." William White's expression immediately shifted. He angrily scolded, "This is ridiculous. This small restaurant barely supports the two of us, and now you bring this trouble here. Sorry, we're not hiring. You should look elsewhere." "Father." Bianca's face flushed with anger. Ever since she could remember, her father had always been incredibly stingy, to the point where it seemed impossible to change. At that moment, a man stepped out of the restaurant. His demeanor was sharp, and he was dressed impeccably. As soon as he saw Bianca, his eyes lit up, and he smiled, saying, "Bianca, I can help your friend find a job. Don't bother Uncle William anymore." "Ethan Green, why are you here?" Bianca immediately frowned, clearly not having a good impression of the man. William White, however, glared at her and advised, "Bianca, how can you talk to Ethan like that? He's the top student at your medical academy, comes from a good family, and you should network. I mean, learn from him more." Seeing her father treat Ethan Green like his own son, Bianca felt suffocated with anger. Other parents would worry about their children falling in love too early, but her father was the opposite, constantly thinking of ways to push her closer to Ethan Green. Kyle Lincoln remained silent, but he could clearly see the situation unfolding before him. "Hey, looking for a job?" Sensing Kyle's gaze, Ethan Green turned to him with an arrogant tone. "Coincidentally, my pharmacy is short on someone to prepare medicinal decoctions. You can try there. Just say I referred you." "A menial job?" As the leader of the Order of the Celestial Physicians, Kyle Lincoln couldn't even remember all his disciples, let alone recognize the lowest-ranked menial workers in his sect. And now Ethan Green wanted him to take on such a role. This kind of disdain, how could Kyle Lincoln tolerate it? Kyle Lincoln smirked coldly. "My price is very high. Can you afford it?" Ethan Green raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth curling into a sinister smile. He said, "Friend, you should be realistic. Dreaming of grand rewards without real talent will only lead to tragedy." "Who says he doesn't have real talent?" Bianca, recalling Kyle Lincoln's miraculous acupuncture skills, immediately wanted to defend him. Unexpectedly, before Bianca White could finish her sentence, the restaurant was suddenly filled with waves of vomiting sounds, growing louder by the second. Some even collapsed to the ground. "William White, get in here now. These people are suffering from food poisoning," someone cursed loudly, causing William White to turn pale with fear. Forgetting all about Kyle Lincoln, he dashed into the restaurant. Ethan Green, on the other hand, secretly rejoiced, thinking he finally had a chance to shine in front of Bianca White. He smiled and said, "Bianca, don't worry, leave it to me." Watching Ethan Green stride in arrogantly, Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but chuckle. He leaned closer to Bianca White and whispered, "That guy walks unsteadily, his face pale, clearly suffering from kidney deficiency. Don't let his money fool you. Stop talking nonsense. I don't like him at all." Bianca White blushed, playfully punching Kyle Lincoln. Suddenly, she realized, if someone's suffering from food poisoning, it must be my father's responsibility. "Can you help him?" Initially, Kyle Lincoln had no intention of stepping in. With modern medical advancements, unless the poisoning was severe, a simple stomach pumping at the hospital would suffice. However, seeing Bianca White's earnest expression, Kyle Lincoln changed his mind. "If necessary, I'll help." With that, the two of them entered the restaurant. What should have been a pleasant meal had turned into chaos. The tables and floors were littered with people, most vomiting violently. A few diners, in more severe conditions, had rolled their eyes back and fainted. Chapter 4, Treating Illness Through Acupressure. William White was paralyzed with fear, his legs stiff, nearly collapsing to the ground. Ethan Green, who followed closely behind, remained calm and confidently said, "Mr. William, don't worry. Let me handle this." "You brat, what can you do?" an impatient diner shouted angrily. Ethan Green puffed out his chest with pride. "Of course, I'm going to treat them. I'm a top student at the medical academy. If you don't trust me, surely you can trust my student ID, right?" He then pulled out a student ID from the medical academy, which not only confirmed his identity but also displayed numerous awards. "Fine, then treat them." The diner, unable to argue further, reluctantly agreed. Ethan Green approached one of the patients, pulling out a few silver needles. He inserted them into the celestial pivot, Sea of Chi, and Yin Tomb acupoints, gently twisting the needles. These acupoints were crucial for treating food poisoning. Minutes passed, but the patient remained unconscious, showing no signs of improvement. Strange, aren't these the right acupoints for treating food poisoning? Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Ethan Green began to panic, cold sweat forming on his forehead. "They're suffering from intestinal damp heat, but your needles are targeting cold dampness in the intestines. The treatment doesn't match the symptoms, so of course, it's ineffective." Kyle Lincoln squatted beside the patient and softly remarked. Though his voice was low, it was enough to capture everyone's attention. In an instant, all eyes, except those of the patients lying on the floor, turned to Kyle Lincoln. "You know nothing, can you stop causing trouble already?" Ethan Green said angrily, just about to try another method when Kyle Lincoln directly pulled the needle out. The room suddenly erupted, everyone tensed up, and William White became even more furious, unable to hold back as he shouted, "Ethan, do you even know what you're doing? Step aside, or you'll get dragged into this mess." Ethan Green immediately stepped aside, sneering coldly at Kyle Lincoln. "If anything happens to them, the responsibility will all be yours." Kyle Lincoln paid no attention to them, his fingers moving deftly as he swiftly pressed 3 acupoints, joining Valley, Celestial Pivot, and Upper Great Void, on the abdomen of the poisoned diner. His movements were smooth and precise, without hesitation. Seeing this, Ethan Green sneered even more. "Do you think this is some kind of TV drama? Acupoints? This is ridiculous." The unpoisoned diners began to stir again, and a few hot-tempered ones rolled up their sleeves, ready to drag Kyle Lincoln out. Some even threatened to call the police, and if it weren't for Bianca White's desperate pleas, the authorities might have already been involved. Suddenly, a wet stain appeared beneath one of the nearby diners. Upon closer inspection, it was clear that the person's pants were soaked. William White could no longer stay silent, shouting in alarm, "Why are they all wetting themselves? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Father, stop distracting him." Bianca White pinched William White's waist, worried it might interfere with Kyle Lincoln's acupuncture. Her eyes never left Kyle Lincoln for a moment. "Uncle William, give me a hand and fetch a cold towel," Kyle Lincoln instructed as he stood up and moved to another unconscious diner. The 9 needles of the sun god were incredibly miraculous but required pure yang inner energy as a foundation. After his reincarnation, Kyle Lincoln's mastery of the 9 needles of the sun god had been rendered useless. The pure yang energy in his body was no more than that of an average person. After performing continuous acupuncture, Kyle Lincoln felt his eyelids growing heavy, as though they could close at any moment. The cold towel was necessary to stay alert. If he fainted before saving all the patients, what a disgrace that would be. William White grumbled in dissatisfaction, "I won't join in on this nonsense." "I'll help him," Bianca White retorted, shooting William White a glare. She ran to the kitchen to fetch a towel and went straight to Kyle Lincoln, taking the initiative to wipe his sweat. "Bianca, don't help him. Just look at him, he's completely unreliable. If the patients hold him accountable later, you'll be implicated too." Ethan Green frowned deeply, his expression dark as he watched Kyle Lincoln, as though afraid he might flee. Kyle Lincoln raised his head indifferently and said bluntly, "If I don't treat them, can you cure them?" Ethan Green's facial muscles twitched slightly, and he pointed a finger at Kyle Lincoln, just about to lash out when someone suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Oh my God, he's actually waking up." The previously unconscious diner sat up in a daze. Seeing the wet patch on his pants, his old face flushed red. Glancing around, he awkwardly asked, "Who splashed water on me?" Chapter 5, The Affectionate Maiden, Saved Your Life, Yet Still So Stubborn? "That's my urine you're drenched in," someone teased, quickly shifting their gaze back to Kyle Lincoln, eager not to miss the unfolding drama. Reflecting carefully and taking in the chaotic scene before him, the diner finally realized what had happened. He sincerely looked at Kyle Lincoln and said, "You saved me. Thank you so much. Thank me later. I still have others to save." At this moment, Kyle's face was drained of color, sweat as large as beads continuously streamed down his face. Bianca White, distressed by his state, wiped his sweat while instinctively supporting his arm, afraid he might collapse at any moment. The affectionate maiden, now completely captivated by Kyle Lincoln's unwavering focus on healing, seemed to have forgotten William White standing behind her, watching. Seeing this, William White was fuming with rage, nearly choking on his own anger. To add fuel to the fire, someone nearby remarked, "William White, your daughter found you an excellent son-in-law. This man is truly a miracle doctor." "Humph, he wishes," William White grumbled, wanting to storm over and separate the two. However, he feared disrupting Kyle Lincoln's treatment, unsure how he'd handle the aftermath if that happened. Meanwhile, Ethan Green stood nearby, his face pale with fury, his eyes glaring daggers at Kyle Lincoln, flames of anger practically erupting from him. After treating the last poisoned diner, Kyle Lincoln was utterly exhausted, his complexion as pale as a sheet of paper. He no longer had the strength to stand. As he attempted to push himself up, his legs gave out, and he fell backward. Instinctively, Bianca White reached out with both arms, catching him directly in her embrace. Soft, comforting, and carrying a pure fragrance that seemed to seep into his very soul. Within a minute, Kyle Lincoln's pale face gained a faint blush. Even he was astonished. Truly a case of yin nourishing yang. At the moment of contact with Bianca White, he felt a dense yin energy emanating from her fragrant body. Using the 9 needles of the sun god technique, he absorbed it entirely, converting it into a strand of spiritual energy for cultivation. Without this, he wouldn't have recovered his complexion so quickly. Could the yin energy in Bianca's body have a similar effect to the mystic lunar herb? Quickly, Kyle Lincoln dismissed the thought. In his past life as a master of medical arts, he had never encountered such a phenomenon in any woman. The strange occurrence just now was likely a mere coincidence. "You little rascal, are you planning to stay there forever, taking advantage of her?" William White's grumbling voice broke through. Kyle Lincoln smiled wryly, noticing Bianca White's blushing, makeup-free face. He said, "I'm fine now. Thank you. It's nothing." "You can rest a bit longer," Bianca White replied, burying her head even deeper. Was this some kind of subtle hint? Hearing this, Ethan Green clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging into his palms, wishing he could devour Kyle Lincoln alive. Smiling faintly, Kyle Lincoln still stood up, paying no attention to the slight disappointment that flashed through Bianca White's eyes. He looked at William White with a serious expression. "Where did you buy this batch of wine from? Which distributor?" "Wine? Weren't they suffering from food poisoning?" William White looked confused, thinking to himself, the wine distributor is young Master Arthur Gold, so there shouldn't be any issues, right? Kyle Lincoln pointed to the diners who were unharmed and still watching the commotion. "You can ask them if they drank the wine." Recalling that the saved diners were helped by detoxification through urination, these diners suddenly realized, "William White, so you were selling fake wine." Some even rolled up their sleeves, glaring at William White with hostility, seemingly ready to teach him a lesson. "My father didn't know it was fake wine. We are responsible, but the distributor is the real culprit." Bianca White bravely stood in front of William White, speaking, though her eyes still showed a hint of fear. However, this courage left Kyle Lincoln impressed. He decided to help William White one more time. "Bianca is right. We, like you, are victims as well." Kyle Lincoln retracted his silver needle, smiling at everyone. The miracle doctor is right. We should demand compensation from the distributor. Someone shouted, and the emotions of all the diners were stirred, buzzing with anger and discussion. However, Kyle Lincoln noticed a fleeting trace of fear and hesitation in William White's eyes, something not easily detected. Bianca White didn't notice anything unusual. She only wanted to help her father get through this ordeal quickly and hurriedly said, "Father, contact the distributor immediately. They need to take responsibility for this." Chapter 6. The uninvited guest. William White hesitated, pulling Bianca White aside and quietly murmured, "Bianca, there's no real harm done. Maybe we should just let it go." "How can we just let it go? If Kyle Lincoln hadn't been here, our shop would have been shut down by now." Bianca White frowned, her face full of indignation. But nothing really happened in the end, William White defended, lowering his head as if he had something difficult to admit. Kyle Lincoln gestured for Bianca White to remain silent, and she obediently closed her mouth. "Uncle William, is it because this distributor has significant influence, and you don't want to get involved with them?" Kyle Lincoln asked calmly. "Hayes." William White sighed, realizing Kyle Lincoln had hit the mark. He no longer concealed the truth and admitted, "This wine came from young Master Arthur Gold." Young Master Arthur Gold. Hearing this name, the diners who had previously been eager to seek compensation immediately shrank back, muttered a few words of thanks, and quickly left. Ethan Green also let out an awkward laugh, but his words were pleasant. "Uncle William, the matter has been resolved, so I'll take my leave now. I'll come visit you again when I have free time." "All right, go ahead with your work." "Thank you for today." William White waved his hand, as if all the patients had been cured by Ethan Green himself. Kyle Lincoln didn't dwell on these matters and thoughtfully said, "It seems that the influence of young Master Arthur Gold is truly significant. Just now, those people were so aggressive, but now they've all vanished. Isn't that a good thing? It was quite a troublesome situation, but now they've all left, and I don't have to explain anything." William White breathed a sigh of relief. The thought of having to demand compensation made him nervous. He didn't have the courage for that, but with so many people suffering from alcohol poisoning, he couldn't avoid responsibility. If those people pursued the matter, he'd surely have to pay a large sum, covering the compensation that young Master Arthur Gold should have paid. Unexpectedly, William White seemed resigned to this outcome. Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but laugh and teasingly said, "According to what you're saying, we should be thanking young Master Arthur Gold? Isn't that true?" The reputation of young Master Arthur Gold really came in handy. The protection fees we paid weren't wasted after all. William White, feeling relieved about saving a large compensation amount, spoke with a mix of gratitude and relief. Still focused on Kyle Lincoln, Bianca White suddenly expressed concern. "Father, you even pay protection fees? Are they gangsters? That's outrageous." "Shh, don't talk nonsense. There are no gangsters here." "What's that saying again?" Taking someone's money to help them avoid trouble, William White realized he had misspoken and quickly clarified. "He's clearly one of them." Bianca White pouted, her small face flushing with anger. However, William White had no intention of pursuing young Master Arthur Gold, so she couldn't do anything about it. "Enough about that. Clean up the mess in the shop first," William White scolded, pointing at the chaotic scene on the floor. "You little brat, if you're not in a hurry, lend a hand too." "Father, you didn't even keep him here, so how can you expect him to help clean up?" Bianca White complained. "I didn't say he'd do it for free." Later, I'll call old Master Alexander Gold and see if this kid can work as a school doctor over there." William White rolled his eyes but softened his tone. "Old Master Alexander Gold will surely accept him. He's the professor of Eastern medicine at Mid-Sea Academy of Healing and also my mentor." Bianca White beamed, her cheeks blushing as she spoke. "Maybe he'll even recommend him to Mid-Sea Grand Hospital No. 1. I'll work hard to intern there too." Her shy and innocent demeanor was truly endearing, and Kyle Lincoln couldn't help but steal a few more glances. Feeling as though her soul had been seen through, Bianca White quickly turned away. Just as she was about to help clean the shop, a few uninvited guests arrived. "Business is booming, huh? Not a single table is empty." 7 or 8 thuggish men with eccentric appearances swaggered in. The one leading them, with striking red-dyed hair, glanced around before sneering, "But William White, making money like this, you can't let us brothers suffer. The protection fee this month was too low." Boss Rowan Red, "You must have forgotten. I've always paid according to the rules, not a penny short." William White approached Rowan Red submissively, his back nearly bent to the ground. "That was last month. Starting this month, your protection fee has to increase." Rowan Red sneered coldly, his eyes sweeping over the floor littered with empty liquor bottles. "Serving your customers such cheap booze, is that okay? I'll have the brothers bring over a few dozen crates of Mao Tai for you." Chapter 7, Dead End, Red. "Boss Rowan Red, this is just small business, no need to use such fine liquor." William White smiled, but tears were almost falling from his eyes. Rowan Red spat on the ground, his face turning fierce as he cursed, "Don't be ungrateful. Giving you the lowest wholesale price is just to let you earn a bit more. Besides, I'm doing this out of respect for Bianca, your little sister." William White quickly stepped in front of Rowan Red, smiling obsequiously. "Boss Rowan Red, you're absolutely right. I'll take a case of Mao Tai to try selling." "Damn it, are you still trying to bargain with me?" Rowan Red shoved William White aside, glaring at him. Moments later, his tone softened. "Why make things hard for yourself? Let Bianca be my mistress, and I wouldn't even charge you for this stock." A sudden laugh broke the tense atmosphere. Kyle Lincoln, who had been silent all along, suddenly chuckled, lazily eyeing the furious Rowan Red. He joked, "Mr. William, with that rooster comb hairstyle of his, what makes him think he can pursue Bianca? Does he know how to crow?" Rowan Red's face immediately darkened, his thick eyebrows knitting together, making him look even more menacing. "Who's this brat daring to mock Boss Rowan Red?" Before Rowan Red could respond, one of his lackeys stepped forward, holding a switchblade in his hand, flicking it open and closed arrogantly. "Oh no, Boss Rowan Red, please don't get angry. I'll discipline this kid right away." William White was on the verge of tears, frantically pleading. He tried to warn Kyle Lincoln, but Kyle spoke up first, "You're ridiculous. Why would I ignore a beautiful girl like Bianca and instead be interested in you?" Bianca White's pale, delicate face instantly flushed red with embarrassment. "You bastard, this kid deserves a beating. Brothers, get him." Rowan Red's fury erupted. As a local kingpin, if he allowed himself to be mocked without retaliation, he would lose all face. Seeing Rowan Red and his men about to charge, Kyle Lincoln pushed William White aside and said, "Mr. William, take care of Bianca." The moment he finished speaking, Kyle Lincoln lunged forward. Rowan Red didn't expect him to move so swiftly and swung his fists wildly. Kyle Lincoln's movements were light and agile, dodging every punch with ease. Then, seemingly without effort, he delivered a kick. The kick appeared gentle, as though it lacked any force. Strangely, Rowan Red couldn't avoid it and could only watch as the kick landed on his stomach. A powerful force followed. Ah! With a loud cry, Rowan Red was sent flying 3 meters away, landing heavily on the ground. Everyone was stunned. What kind of immense force would it take to kick someone into the air like that? Kyle Lincoln stood calmly in place, as if he had just done something completely ordinary. However, deep down, he felt a bit frustrated. This body was truly too weak. He had exerted all his strength, yet the destructive power he could unleash was only this much. If given the chance, he needed to go out and see if there were any spiritual herbs or miraculous plants around. For cultivators, spiritual herbs and miraculous plants held a status equivalent to that of wealth in the hearts of ordinary people. Having such plants meant being able to refine high-grade elixirs, which were immensely beneficial for advancing cultivation with no downsides. The only question was how many naturally occurring spiritual herbs and miraculous plants still existed in this era. "You brat! You even dare to hit me? Do you know who my boss is?" Rowan Red struggled to get up, clutching his stomach, his face twisted in pain. This voice snapped Kyle Lincoln out of his thoughts. He sneered and asked curiously, "Baby red, grenade red, or dirty red? Damn it, you must have a death wish." Rowan Red laughed angrily, his gaze shifting to William White and Bianca White. Letting out a cold snort, he said darkly, "William White, if you don't seek trouble, trouble won't find you. Hiring this idiot to guard your place, what a foolish decision. Just wait until young Master Arthur Gold returns from the capital. Let's see how he deals with you. Brothers, let's go." With that, Rowan Red slung his arm over the shoulder of the lackey beside him and walked out step by step. William White was momentarily dumbfounded. Young Master Arthur Gold was a figure who wielded great influence in this region. If he truly decided to confront a small-time commoner like William, then William would have no way out. Chapter 8, A Mysterious Background. "Young man, perhaps you could say a word to Rowan Red on my behalf." William White looked extremely uneasy. He turned awkwardly to Kyle Lincoln, but the next second, his voice suddenly stopped. Slowly, he uttered 2 words, "I'm sorry." But Kyle Lincoln was nowhere to be seen. "Father, Kyle Lincoln is over there." Bianca White suddenly pointed in a direction, her face filled with astonishment. At some point, Kyle Lincoln had dashed outside, catching up to Rowan Red and appearing at the front entrance. To Rowan Red, Kyle Lincoln now resembled a grim reaper. His entire being exuded a chilling, menacing aura that was indescribably terrifying. Suppressing the fear rising within him, Rowan Red mustered all his courage and asked, "What do you want?" "Just now, you said something I really liked." Kyle Lincoln's smile was dark and eerie, as if enveloped by an impenetrable layer of gloom. "It's called, 'If you don't seek death, you won't die.'" The same phrase, when uttered by Kyle Lincoln, sent chills down people's spines. Rowan Red's eyes widened in terror, and he quickly stepped back a few paces. You dare hit me? Try it. Want a beating? No problem." Kyle Lincoln flexed his wrists and sneered. "This is the first time I've heard such a shameless request." Pfft. Bianca White couldn't hold back and burst into laughter, only to hurriedly cover her mouth. Because Kyle Lincoln's fist had indeed landed squarely on Rowan Red's face. Blood spurted from his nose, his eyes swelled like a panda's, and a large lump formed on his face. In an instant, Rowan Red's demeanor transformed completely. Gone was any trace of his thug-like arrogance. He now looked like a punching bag, inviting anyone to take a swing. Clapping his hands, Kyle Lincoln finally stopped his flurry of punches. "You all can get lost now." At his command, Rowan Red and his gang scrambled out of the restaurant in a panic. After running about 10 meters, they suddenly heard Kyle Lincoln's voice again, "Wait, Rowan Red." Like a kite being reeled back in, Rowan Red and his group obediently froze in place. If Kyle told them to go east, they wouldn't dare head west. Kyle Lincoln's voice turned icy. "The day young Master Arthur Gold returns, tell him to come see me directly. If any of you dare harm Uncle William or Bianca, I have 1,000 ways to make your lives worse than death." In the 25th century, Kyle Lincoln's cultivation was profound, his strength unparalleled. He had always been the one bullying others, never tolerating the slightest grievance. So when faced with Rowan Red's arrogance, Kyle Lincoln struck without hesitation, beating him to a pulp to vent his anger. Just recalling the beating made Rowan Red shudder. Forcing a stiff smile, he stammered, "I understand. Now get lost." A minute later, the restaurant finally returned to peace. Bianca White, seemingly unfazed, ran up to Kyle Lincoln, squeezing his biceps and tapping his chest with a look of amazement. "You're incredible. It's the first time I've seen someone fight like that. Have you trained in martial arts?" "Martial arts?" A trace of self-mockery flickered in Kyle Lincoln's heart. In the past, whenever he acted, the results were earth-shattering. Now, he could only display a few martial arts moves to deal with a bunch of street thugs. Well, cultivation can always be started anew, but a life is only given once. Being able to avoid the heavenly tribulation and reincarnate back to the 21st century is already a great fortune. Instead of complaining, why not live this life to the fullest? Did you figure it out? It's really hard to keep one's strength hidden these days. In an instant, Kyle Lincoln cast aside his heavy thoughts and flashed a carefree smile. Bianca White couldn't help but laugh at his remark, her delicate face blooming like a flower, leaving others momentarily dazed. "You brat, stay away from my daughter, or don't even think about staying here." William White, seeing Kyle Lincoln and Bianca White chatting and laughing, grew furious. He only had one daughter and couldn't allow some boy with an unclear background to take an interest in her. Bianca White was long accustomed to William White's grumpy personality and paid him no mind. The next moment, she suddenly reacted and looked at William White with surprised delight. "Dad, does that mean you've decided to let him stay?" "What choice do I have?" William White glared, now putting on a stern demeanor. "If Rowan Red comes looking for this brat and doesn't find him, he'll surely vent his anger on me. I'm not that